Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's great to see everyone coming on to our first ever Northland Diversity and Aging series. My name is Georgia Lane. I am with the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging, and I have the pleasure of serving as an MC for today. And I am going to pass it over to my co-MC, Amy Bergstrom.
Thank you, Georgia, and welcome everyone. It's a real privilege for me to be co-emceeing this event. My name is Amy Bergstrom, and I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer here at the College of St. Scholastica, one of the partners in this series, and I'm really excited that you're all with us today, and it's a real privilege. This is to be a part of this exciting event. And so with that, I would like to share a land acknowledgement that was gifted to us, if you will, that's used by the Northland Foundation, and just a way to center ourselves in terms of our recognition of space and place as we come into community with each other this morning. So the Northland Foundation, which is one of our co-sponsors here this morning, recognizes the land we currently live and work on originally was and continues to be the homelands of Indigenous people. We currently enjoy access to this land because the land was ceded, territory relinquished in a nation-to-nation treaty process between the Anishinaabe people and the United States government. By recognizing Indigenous homelands, we accept our shared history and make a commitment to shape our ongoing relationships with justice and reconciliation as our guiding values.
Great, thank you so much, Amy, for sharing that. Also, thank you to the Northland Foundation for sharing the land acknowledgement. We're going to transition. I'd like to introduce Mimi Stender, as well as extend a note of gratitude and thanks for Mimi and her leadership. She really was instrumental in bringing us together here today and providing leadership to make this happen. So huge thanks to Mimi Stender. It's just been such a pleasure to get this group of people together doing this work. So Mimi is the founder and president of Duluth Aging Support, an innovative nonprofit organization that provides valuable resources for older adults and caregivers in the Northland. The mission of Duluth Aging Support is to enhance the lives of older adults and caregivers through resources, outreach, awareness, advocacy, and collaborative partnerships. Mimi is passionate about bringing together organizations and individuals to learn from each other and strengthen ties between generations and across neighborhoods and sectors to build a stronger community together. So once again, thank you, Mimi, for all of your work, and I would like to pass it off to you to share your thoughts.
Thank you, Georgia, and greetings, everyone, and thank you for attending our first ever Northland Diversity and Aging Series event. As Georgia said, I'm Mimi Stender, and I'm thrilled to introduce this series. The College of St. Scholastica's Gerontology Program and Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, the Northland Foundation, the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging, and Duluth Aging Support are pleased to bring you this series, featuring panel discussions with community members living in the Northland and presentations by experts that cover topics related to the aging journey. Topics such as caregiving, like today's event, and in the future, we'll have aging in rural environments, dementia, intergenerational collaborations, and workforce. With this series, we seek to ignite conversations and promote learning across generations and cultures about the caregiving and aging experience. This series is an intentional space, an opportunity to learn and share unique stories that help us develop a richer understanding of one another. Regardless of your role in our community, you can more intentionally engage with and support our older community members and those providing care for them. Within every sector, there are significant ways to shape or influence decisions, policies, systems, plans, or discourse that can improve the journey of aging or caregiving in our communities. And we are all aging. All sectors in our society and individuals in our Northland communities are impacted by aging, and we're living longer now than we ever have. Pre-pandemic life expectancy at birth rates have improved dramatically in industrialized countries over the past century. By 2030, when the last of the baby boom cohort reaches 65, for the first time in US history, the number of people over 65 is expected to be close to the number of children under 18. Another way to frame this is that in the last decade, the number of people over 65 has increased by 36%, compared to only 3% for those under age 65. A century ago, 1 in 10 Americans were over the age of 65. Today, for many areas in the Northland region, 1 in 5 people are over 65. And in some of the rural Northland areas, that number is 1 in 3. And this is wonderful. This is a public health achievement. But within these statistics, great disparities exist. For example, the zip code, meaning the neighborhood where you live, matters. In one Northland county, St. Louis County, there is an 11-year life expectancy difference between zip codes. Some of the very ways that make us special and unique may also challenge our quality of life as we get older. The Northland Diversity and Aging Series team recognizes that there are countless ways that we are different from one another. Of course, cultural diversity is a primary factor. Cultural diversity may include language, religion, or spiritual beliefs, race, sexual orientation, gender, age, and ethnicity. But there are many other dimensions in our lives that shape our experiences and make us different from one another, such as socioeconomic background, trauma and crisis experiences, family background and history, educational background, mobility or disability status, where you live, your zip code, your neighborhood characteristics and type of housing, and access to basic needs like food, housing, transportation, healthcare, education, and social connections. To truly appreciate diversity in aging, we need to be sensitive and aware of the intersection of these differences and value how individual experiences impact our older community members. Our commitment through this series is to inspire discussion around better ways we can support, engage with, and create opportunities for the contributions of older people and their caregivers. Let's think differently about aging. It's not only about lifespan, but about how time is spent throughout the aging journey. And we're in this together as a Northland community. As we live and age, let's work together to help one another improve our ability to maintain physical, emotional, and social health and well-being. I'll close with some questions to consider. What are your intersections with people older than you, people further along in the journey? And how can you do a better job of recognizing, valuing, and engaging with them? What is your role to encourage and support older community members' continued contributions, social connections, and access to resources? Thank you so much and enjoy today's event.
Thank you, Mimi, for those very inspiring remarks. And it's my distinct honor and privilege to welcome and introduce our keynote speaker, Rajean Moone. Rajean's professional career is dedicated to eliminating ageism and working on age-friendly initiatives that support the inclusion of older adults in society. As a child of the Arrowhead, Rajean was born in International Falls, Minnesota, and graduated from the College of St. Scholastica. In the past, Rajean worked with the State Unit on Aging and area agencies on aging, including Arrowhead. He aided in the founding of Training to Serve, the Minnesota Diverse Elders Coalition, and Finish Strong Funders Network for Aging Services. Academically, Rajean holds a BA in psychology, an MS degree in gerontology, a PhD in social work, and a Minnesota nursing home administrator's license and assisted living director license. Rajean joined academia full-time in 2018 in a position spread across the University of Minnesota campus with roles in the College of Continuing and Professional Studies, Center for Healthy Aging and Innovation, and Minnesota North Star GWEP. Rajean is appointed to the Faculty Senate and Governor's Council on an Age-Friendly Minnesota. He serves on the board of the Minnesota Association of Geriatrics Inspired Clinicians and Family Means. He is a fellow of the Gerontological Society of America, a lifelong member of the Minnesota Gerontological Society, a Hartford Fellow, McNair Scholar, and a Health and Aging Policy Fellow. Welcome. We are delighted to have you with us as our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy, for that introduction. And thank you to Mimi for helping set the stage for some of my comments today and our panel. I'm always excited to be back in the Arrowhead, even if it is virtual from my home in the Twin Cities. My heart does rest in the Northland, and I have many great friends and colleagues. I'm here to provide a little bit of context. Tia, if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. And do some stage setting around caregiving before we really dive into some of the conversations and lived experiences in various diverse communities. My research, in addition to relating to ageism and policy for older adults, has really delved into the area of LGBTQ elders and caregiving. And I look forward to joining the panel, talking a little bit about the experience of LGBT older adults and caregivers and families. Next slide, please. I also appreciate Amy and the Northland Foundation for offering the land acknowledgement at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. We acknowledge that we are located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. Specifically, the university resides on Dakota lands ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. I believe that land acknowledgements are an important step in really understanding our past and working towards a better future. But it's important to realize that they are meaningless unless we all take time to understand their significance and promote change. And I really appreciate this image that you may see on your screen, that no matter the platform, it's still native land. So while I'm on Zoom in the Twin Cities and many of you are in the beautiful Northland, we're all residing on native land. Next slide, please. So caregiving is not a new phenomenon. In fact, friends and family members have always been primary providers of care for older adults across the world. In fact, there was a renowned anthropologist who was asked, when do we really think that society evolved in the history of human beings on the planet? And they asked about the use of tools or the creation of pottery or houses where we lived, the introduction of fire. And she dismissed all of these and she said, no, it was the first discovery of bones that had been healed from a breakage. What this meant was that an older person who may have experienced an injury younger in life was cared for and was able to live to old age. So essentially, she was saying that caregiving was our first real acknowledgement of an evolution of our society as human beings on the planet. Today, over 90% of care is provided by friends and family members to older adults and people with disabilities. In 2000, the federal government recognized this by enacting the National Family Caregiver Support Program in the Older Americans Act. This was one of the first times that funding was ever made available to local communities to provide services and supports to families and friends that were caring for older adults, and not just older adults themselves. Subsequently, the federal government recognized November, the month that we're in now, as National Caregiver Month. So it is very apropos that we have the first in this amazing series focusing on caregivers. So this slide is very busy and it represents some of the current statistics related to caregiving, all of which have increased over time. You'll notice that 1 in 5 people are providing unpaid care, which is much larger in diverse communities. 1/4 of the people are providing care to more than one person. It's become more difficult coordinating care. More people are caring for loved ones living with dementia, and more caregivers identify their own health as fair to poor. Also depicted are some pretty staggering demographic statistics. You can see that the vast majority of caregivers are women. This number has changed over time. Caregivers have had at least one significant financial impact as a result of their caregiving role. You'll also notice that caregiving is spread across generations, with the baby boom generation and Generation X certainly taking the vast majority of caregiving roles, but the increasing number of people in the millennial generation and still those part of the silent generation providing care. And as you can see, most caregivers also work. Next slide, please. First Lady Rosalynn Carter likely said it best when she noted that there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will need caregivers, and those who will become caregivers. And First Lady Rosalynn Carter was very famous in this realm and began the Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregiving in Georgia, which focuses research and policy advocacy on family and friend caregivers. Next slide, please. It's also really important for us to understand, what exactly do we mean by the word caregiver? Well, generally, caregivers fall into 2 different buckets or 2 different groups. First are informal caregivers. Sometimes these are referred to as family or friend caregivers, and at times they're referred to as unpaid. It's important to know that many family and friends that are providing care do receive some form of reimbursement for this care. So unpaid is generally not a term that's used too much in caregiver circles. In Europe, this group of individuals are often referred to as carers, so C-A-R-E-R-S. We have another bucket of caregivers that are sometimes referred to as formal caregivers. They also may be known as care providers or paid caregivers. These are people who have dedicated their job or the career to caring for someone else. These can include staff of nursing homes, home care agencies, and other nonprofit and for-profit organizations across the state and across the country that provide care directly with older adults. It's important to acknowledge that we have a shortage of formal caregivers in Minnesota right now. In fact, about a month ago, Leading Age Minnesota and Care Providers of Minnesota held a press briefing talking about the severe shortage. In Minnesota today, there are 23,000 open positions for formal caregivers in senior care settings. Nursing homes have had to decline 70% of admissions due to the fact that they have a workforce shortage issue. And at this point right now, there are about 24 nursing homes in Minnesota that are at imminent risk of closure due to workforce shortage issues. So today, we want to acknowledge the contributions of both informal and formal caregivers, but we're going to focus primarily on the lived experiences and narratives of stories from those that are part of the informal caregiver bucket. Next slide, please. So today, our panel will explore the intersection of caregivers in diverse communities, including BIPOC, which is a term that may be new to some of you. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, and also LGBT communities. My purpose today to set the stage was not to go through a litany of statistics on caregiving in diverse communities, though there are many out there, and I will just give one as an example. Recently, the federal government highlighted that 1 in 3 Native American and Alaskan Natives are caregivers for an older family member. 1 in 3, that is a staggering statistic. It is something to celebrate, but also something to ensure that we have services and supports for those caregivers to continue in their very vital and important role. Instead of going through additional statistics, I wanted to touch base on some overarching themes before diving into the narratives of different communities through the panel. Up until 1954, and frankly, several decades after that, the prevailing thought was that mixing of people from different communities would lead to only increased discrimination and prejudice. Gordon Allport actually challenged these beliefs by flipping the narrative, that in fact, bringing together diverse groups increases group cohesion and leads to decreased discrimination and prejudice. It begins to really eliminate the concept of the others and shifts to a we in community. More recently, societal consciousness is awakening and recognizing that while Minnesota is one of the best places to age, we're frequently cited as #1 in national surveys. We received that rank again last year from AARP. We do offer, as Mimi noted, some of the starkest health, economic, and social disparities among minoritized groups. There are silver linings, especially in this societal consciousness awakening. With a shift to person-centered care, we focus on what it means to be an individual and understand that person within the context of their environment. Rather than suggesting we treat everyone the same, which is a very common response we receive from a formal service provider, or many of you know the golden rule, treat everyone as I would want to be treated. Both are very laudable. It's about treating people with universal respect and dignity. Instead, we're trying to focus to treat everyone as they want to be treated. Because unlike the golden rule, I certainly want to be treated differently than some of my friends and family members. Person-centered care can move us even further into more age-friendly and diverse-friendly communities. In addition, we're shifting away from the concept of cultural competence. Cultural competence suggests that we're either competent or incompetent as it relates to culture, as though we could take some sort of test to see if we can pass, and then magically we're competent. And as stagnant, we're done learning. We don't need to learn anything else about culture because we're competent. Instead, we can focus on what's referred to as a cultural humility lens. In this lens, we recognize that culture evolves, it's ever changing, and that we as lifelong learners can always expand our awareness and consciousness of culture. One clear way to see this evolution is through language. Language is constantly evolving and we can evolve with it. Words in the past, such as homosexual, colored, handicapped, have evolved to more person-centered and inclusive language, such as LGBT, BIPOC, and disability. It's exciting, but admittedly can be daunting. If we allow ourselves to be genuine, we can open up to new learnings and experiences. Next slide, please, Tia. I wanted to end with one brief study recently conducted by me and a research team here in Minnesota. It was a qualitative study, so interviews of caregivers. We were really interested in understanding how their role, their caregiving role for older adults and people with disabilities shifted during the COVID pandemic. As a qualitative study, it's a very small sample. We had hour to hour and a half long interviews. 60 caregivers participated in the study, including 10 conducted in Somali, 5 conducted in Spanish, and 5 in Korean. Depicted on the screen here are major themes of social isolation, decline in mental health, decline in physical and cognitive functioning, keeping relatives safe, lack of caregiving support, and caregiver stress. Interesting, these themes intersected with additional barriers in diverse participants. For example, Somali caregivers also discussed the role of religion, family expectations, and racism in healthcare, and the implications of those on their caregiving. Next slide, please, Tia. I hope that my comments help set the stage for our conversations about caregiving. I really look forward to the panel conversations and dialogue about their experiences. I'm not an expert. I approach things with cultural humility, and I'm excited to learn more from my fellow panelists. So I'll turn it back over to our hosts, and we can begin the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rajean. That was fascinating. I haven't heard the bit about the anthropologist noting the onset of caregiving as a, major indicator of when culture has evolved. So that was fascinating. You had so many wonderful things in there. And appreciate you sharing your information and expertise. So I also am very excited that we have two amazing people today to share their lived caregiving experience with us. We have two people who are from the Northland and their area, from this area, but they have really incredible stories. So I just want to say thank you to both Don and Janet for coming to share your stories. And in order for us to get a little bit of a background on them, we have a couple of videos which highlights some of their lived experience as caregivers. And we'll be able to take that information with us as we go into some questions and discussions with them. So let's hand it off to, I believe, Tia to start the videos.
My name is Dawn LaPrairie, and I'm from Fond du Lac Reservation, and I'm very happy to be here today. Having my family, I'm a great-grandmother, mother, auntie, sister. So it's kind of like a big family that we're all together, and that's what I do. And then my teaching. I grew up on the reservation, lived there all my life until late 20s, and then I moved to St. Paul, lived there about 8 years, had my family there. And then I moved back to the reservation where I live now. Okay, with my brother, it was more of a shared experience because my mother was the main caregiver of my brother, who was a TBI victim. And he was like 23 years old, and he was injured in a hit and run accident in Minneapolis. And he was, had a promising career that he was going to be a doctor, medical doctor. So it started with him. So my mother, because she got sick, okay, had to find another place for my brother. My mother, was like, worked on for the tribe, took care of him full time, was active within the community because of her role. So it was like, and somebody had said to us one time, because my sister was very active within the community, my other sister was active in her community, and then for myself. So this woman said to me, you must have had a really strong mother, and I think that's what inspires me, because of the way she was and what she would do and how she would work so hard. Kind of stepping in when my mother would need help. And then now, since she's gone, it's like, okay, then my sister and I kind of take on that role. And then my youngest daughter was tragically killed, and she had 2 children, and one was 15 and one was 5. And I helped take care of them. And then I became the caregiver, the legal guardian of my grandson. Care team is mainly my daughter-in-law, okay? And then my other daughter that lives in on the Lower Sioux Reservation. She lives down there in southern Minnesota. So she'll come up for periods of time and help out. And it's like when she comes, when my daughter comes, when Auntie comes, it's like grandma is now grandma. And I'm not in that role of, you know, I'm doing all these things for Gnu, you know, that's his name. I'm not doing all those things that I would normally be doing. It's like I'm stepping back and letting somebody else take over for a while, and then, you know, kind of doing my own thing, you know. So it's kind of like they say, it takes a community to raise a child. Well, okay, that's what I have within our family, you know. And one thing though is like when I have this young boy that's rambunctious and wants to play ball, and then here I am trying to go out there and play football with them. So there's those things that I think that, is that fair to him that, okay, grandma's the one that's trying to do this, and I kind of feel guilty about it at times, because I think, you know, maybe somebody else should be trying, you know, doing this, you know, maybe I should go and try and find a big brother or something like that. So those are the challenges that I face. My last aunt and my last uncle passed away. So now it's like that generation of, okay, on my dad's side and my mother's side, where, okay, now I feel like now I'm officially the elder, even though I've been an elder, but it's like, no, it's like even a bigger role, because then I don't have that next generation up from me anymore on either side. So it's kind of like a almost like an enlightenment for me, because it's like a new beginning. I want yous to know, as you know, as students, as young people, you know, try to do your best. You know, you're gonna have to say, I'm sorry. You're gonna have to say, oh, I forgive you, you know, and always be good and be kind, you know, be kind. It's not hard to do, you know.
Thank you so much for that great video. And I apologize that we lost a really important introduction and welcome, but these videos will be available after the event. And now I would like to transition to Janet's video.
Hi, I'm Janet Kennedy, and I am currently the executive director of a nonprofit, Healthy Alliances Matter for All, doing business as Health Equity Northland, doing some COVID response and recovery work, and also looking at some of the assessment that we did with the African heritage community and integrating health literacy and health access. I will also share that I do serve as a parish nurse for the St. Mark AME Church. I am a parish health coordinator with the Arrowhead Parish Nurse Association. And then I also serve as Duluth City Council in Western Duluth for District 5. And so I've raised my 2 kids in Western Duluth, and I have 9 grandkids. And now I'm a caregiver for my mom, who is aging with dementia. So my kids are a part of the care team, but I had to leave my home to care for her after she had a few bouts in the hospital, and we recognized it was dementia. 3 years ago, I moved in with her full time and rented out my home now, which has been a blessing, because if I didn't have my home to rent out, I wouldn't be able to care for her now in her home. So we're both living in her home and I'm there full-time caregiving. I don't have to do like bodily care. We have a caregiver come in twice a week that bathes her and does laundry, but I do everything else, like care for the home, make sure she's safe, just kind of watching to make sure she doesn't know she's continuing to brush her teeth and all that stuff. And then just safety around the house, making sure the doors are locked. And if I wasn't there, she wouldn't be able to be in her home, which would be an added cost that she couldn't afford right now. So if it wasn't for me being able to have that asset of a home to rent in her home that she owns, I don't know where she would be. I'll be honest with you, a few months ago, she was ready to leave the home. And we actually went and looked for a assisted living. But we found that the amount of care that she needed, even though she doesn't need a lot of personal care, was way beyond what she could afford, and she would have had to sell her home, and she wasn't willing to do that. That's one thing that she has said, like she wants to keep the asset of a home. She understands how important that is, especially for a family of color, an African-American family. That asset of having a home, like I already said, has been able to afford me to care for her. And it really helped to sort of break that generational poverty for us, right? Because we came from Mississippi, sharecroppers, lived in the projects both on the hillside and West Duluth until she bought her own home. And so it was really important for us. It just happened kind of recently. I didn't recognize that I was, okay, I'm a full-time caregiver probably until maybe around COVID, when COVID happened, when I was home all the time. Right. And that's where my meetings were there and I was home all the time. And I recognized that, oh gosh, this is kind of my world now. Do I need to be here more often? I can't really go and leave off without letting somebody know, or maybe getting care for her, or making sure things are set up. And I think it now, you know, I had to take over setting up her meds and getting her meds each day. I have to set them out, making sure, just watching that she's putting on clothes, or like she's coming out of her room. Sometimes she'll get scared like about scammers and she'll stay in her room. So I'll just have to watch over her visually to make sure she's coming out of her room, getting dressed. Are you eating meds? And then now doing her eye drops. So that's really when it's like, okay, now I am a caregiver. I'm more than just somebody living in the home with her. I spent 25 years in physical therapy as a physical therapy assistant. I did work the last few years in therapy in the facility as a program director and the director of rehab. And then I went off to do home care for a while when I left the inpatient setting. And then I just stopped doing that probably about 3 years ago as my mom started needing more help. And I will say, even as part of my parish nurse work, I did med setups for people in their home. But then when it came to doing it for my mom, it's like, I need some help with a nurse to figure this out. And some of it was just to let my mom know that now I have to do it for her. So it was more of a struggle for her. But then even still, I'm like, what medicine is this, right? Where's it going? Is it nighttime, daytime? So that system was even tough for me. And I would just say, if somebody didn't have a medical background and wasn't used to doing that, how difficult that would be, or even how to ask for that help. And I think I know when to ask for help. That's one good thing I've learned. I think one thing that's important is, like, my mom used to be the caregiver for everyone, even some of her siblings who have mental health issues or vulnerable adults, and she can't do that anymore. I remember a while back, 2 of her brothers started having difficulties, and she used to be the one to care for them and give my cousin advice. And now that's not there. She can't do that anymore. Oh, I think that's been difficult to watch that, where she's not interacting as much, even with family, because of her fears of not answering the phone, or her not being able to be that one that people are going to for the answers, because she was that person in the family.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, both to Dawn and Janet, for sharing those really heartwarming stories of your caregiving experience. That's living and ongoing. And thank you for that. We're going to take some time now and transition into some questions for our panelists, for Dawn and Janet, and our speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question that we have for our panelists. And that question, can you share with us today how your cultural values inform and support your experience as a caregiver?
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And listening to Dawn's video, there are certainly some intersections we share, as I'm on the tail end of the baby boomers and caring for even some of my grandchildren and now my mom. I do want to share, because the first question has to do with cultural values and how that informs and supports the experiences that I have as a caregiver. One of the things I've been sharing and learning about myself and sort of the historical history of being an African American is understanding our value, how our story is relevant. And that really helps me to put into context how I'm caring for my mom and how I support some of our other elders. So I'm going to read a statement which can be seen maybe as a call to reparations. And as I read this statement, we usually take a pause, but what I'll ask is that you choose a word and hold that word and put it into context of how we're interacting with people who are aging and African heritage people. So we acknowledge the historic, enduring, and current contributions and sacrifices of communities displaced, compromised, oppressed, and traumatized by the colonization in the United States of America. Let us pause to give reverence and honor to the African American people for their sacrifices during slavery, and recognize the enduring violence and long-standing inequitable policies and practices that are still relevant today. We seek to give credence to the past and to the present, catalyzing equity, resiliency, wealth, and holistic health to be attainable for everyone. And so that's really important as I learn to be a caregiver for my mom, and the stories that she has told me and the stories she hasn't told me, and recognizing that as her dementia increases, she's not able to share those with me. I wished I would have recognized that before. But yet I still need to hold that and listen to some of the other stories and learn myself, and to help others learn the value of her as an elder. And while she can't really speak to all of what has happened, that really has changed her and her health. And that I also need to recognize that as a caregiver, to hold that as well. So I really have an understanding of where she's coming from, even though she's not able to tell me. So I believe I just wanted to share that, and maybe give Dawn a chance to speak. And I'm not sure how this is flowing, if there's going to be questions from the audience on more of the value piece, but I can pause for now.
Thank you, Janet, for sharing that. And we'll transition then to Dawn. Thank you.
Miigwech, Janet, I really appreciate that. And something that I think about, that cultural piece, is like in working with my brother. Okay, he's in a home, in a TBI home, and I participated in his care plan. I think it was right after COVID, like in June or something like that. And we went, I don't know if people are they're probably all familiar with the care plan, you know, what you're gonna do. And then I thought about it, and I said, something that I think that a piece that should be in the care plan is like, okay, my brother's name is Bob. Bob will participate in a powwow, 2 times a year or whatever. And in that plan, like the social worker was wondering, well, how are we going to do that? Or the place was kind of wondering how we're going to do that. And luckily, there's a Native girl that works at the house. And what she would do is every once in a while, she'd turn on powwow music, and he'd get all excited. And, so I told, the piece about it is, is that I, as a participant, I need to be like the educator, to let everybody know, well, this is what you should do, or this is how we're going to do that. And it's kind of overwhelming, and you get tired of that, because as a Native person, and I'm sure you're this way too, Janet, is that you're always educating people at who you are, and you're always called upon to do that. Okay. So then I said, okay, all right, can you access YouTube? And they said, yeah, we can, I said, well, then look up on there, powwow, Zoom is, play a powwow that's going on, play music that's going on. Look on there for recipes with wild rice, okay? Because there's cultural things that are associated with foods that we eat. Let them have oatmeal. In the gal that lives there or works there is really good at this, because she's a Native woman from Leech Lake. She's really good at doing that. But if we didn't have her there, he wouldn't get the things that he is getting, those little pieces of culture. So if for breakfast, if, we're going to give you some oatmeal and we're going to put some bacon grease on it, because Natives love that, I mean, he's old enough now that he's not going to have no heart attack, it's like he's getting up there. So it's like those little things that need to be kind of a natural part of their lives, and just like my adopted mother, she's in a facility, and she likes these things, or she, asks about these practices that Native people do, and, access the media, the social media, do that. So I guess I just want to say that, and if there's another question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those answers. So much rich information that you guys are sharing, and I really appreciate. I mean, these are rich and deep and important stories for us to hear. And so my question is around what inspired you personally to be part of this panel. You both are very busy women. And so what inspired you to be part of this panel, and why do you feel that we need to have this discussion? And so I'll pop it over to Dawn to go first, and then Janet can go second.
I think what inspired me was that audience of educating people on my community and historically the aging issue. And I think that it's not something new, but it's something that we would always do. When somebody became an elder, and I remember us, my dad and mother taking care of, my grandma lived separately, but yet, it was like clockwork. Every Sunday she came and was with us every day, and we took care of her, and, we'd go on walks with grandma and, that sort of thing. But then when, with my mother, it was like caregiving not only to elders, but yet to her brothers and siblings, or her sisters, to take care of them when they needed caring for. I always remember, wherever my mother was at, there was always an uncle living with her. So it was like there wasn't really any homelessness because they lived with her. So I think that what drew me into this was to let people know about our culture and get the word out, and my experience of being a caregiver to my family and to my brother and to my grandson.
Great. Thanks so much, Dawn. And Janet, same question to you.
I think it's important to tell the stories. I think, well, I know that every time I've had an opportunity to sit in a space and hear my Indigenous neighbors' stories, it really is impactful. And I feel like for the African American people that we haven't been so forthcoming to share those stories, whether it be out of preservation of self, and maybe even historically, nobody wanted to hear them. And quite frankly, if you even tried to tell them, you probably were reprimanded, hung, or something happened, right? And it's not that long ago, and I really want to stress that what my mom went through, I believe has impacted her so horrifically that that's why she maybe even has dementia, because they never really tell us how did it happen, right? There's no medical thing they have told us. There's no, we just know there are brain changes. And we know that children go through that. And I believe some of the trauma she maybe went through as a young person, right? I believe it's called, is it the ACEs we do? And how does that impact people as they get older, and especially people who are not from the Euro-American community, right? Black, Indigenous, people of color. How does some of that history impact that dementia? Or because we talk about health, but I never really hear how dementia is connected to that. But I think that's important, not only just to tell the stories, but to even ask that question, like, because I would love to have some answers as to how my mom was so vibrant and now like her brain she can't really function each day. So there's a both for me. I want to learn more, but I also want to be able to tell the story as we become a more culturally sensitive community. And I really like what Rajean said. We really do need to begin to treat people how they want to be treated. We grew up a lot of times on like, need to treat people how you want to be treated. And it's like, yeah, I just know that my son, who is biracial, but is a Black man, doesn't want to be treated like his mom, right? So I think this is a way to begin to relook at how we socially look at aging throughout our cultures. And I'll yield.
Thank you for that, both of you. That was really inspirational. And again, thank you for committing to being a part of this panel. And I believe we have some questions here for Rajean. We also have some questions that are coming through on the chat and in our Q&A panel that we will transition to as well from the audience. So feel free to continue to put your questions in the Q&A box for us, and we have some time to spend engaging in further discussion and rich dialogue with these guests and experts. But Rajean, this question is for you. And can you talk a little bit about how are caregivers and families defined by the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. That's a great question. And actually, it relates to one that came in the Q&A. So we have to remember that same-sex couples have only had the right to marry universally in the United States for a few years. And so those relationships were not acknowledged. And so, you know, it's a really interesting question, thinking about how we take the definition of family so often for granted. Most often when we think of family, we think of a biological family. These are people that we are related to because of blood or legally through marriage or other means. And these are the people that many of us rely on to provide caregiving and support during those times of need. We also have what's known as a family of choice. And so how I distinguish the difference between these people is on Friday night and Saturday night, who are the people you hang out with? Who are the people that you have dinner with, that you go to the movies with? That's your family of choice. It certainly could be your siblings, your aunts, your kids, whomever, but it also could be your neighbor, your friend that you grew up with during school. For non-LGBT people, they tend to rely more on the biological family for sources of support, whereas in the LGBT community, that's inverse. They tend to rely more on families of choice. And those families of choice are often comprised of other individuals from the LGBT and the Two-Spirit community. And the question that was in the Q&A was talking about, has there been any progress and access in support for caregivers who are families of choice? That's an amazing question, because years ago, if you were not biologically related to someone, you were restricted in visitation in hospitals. You were not given a voice in helping make end-of-life important decisions in a person's care. We are so lucky that we have advanced very far to really broadly define what does it mean to be a caregiver and have access to a person when they are sick in a hospital or another setting. So you can designate someone that is not biologically related to you. We also have the wonderful advanced care directives. If people haven't completed their advanced care directive, it's so important to understand, who do you want at the end of your life making decisions for you if you can't. And so prior to what's often referred to as marriage equality in the LGBT community, LGBT older adults had a binder that was around 3 inches thick of all of the legal documents needed in order to mandate a person to be able to make those decisions. A lot of those have evaporated through marriage and have streamlined through things like the advanced care directive. So we've come a long way. We still have a long way to go, but it is exciting that the definition of family is evolving and becoming more inclusive.
Great. Thanks so much, Rajean. And I kind of have a two-part question here for you. You answered a little bit of it in your response right now, but do you have any more insight in terms of what does caregiving look like and feel like in the LGBT community? You spoke to that a little bit, and then also inviting you to respond to the question, what inspired you to be part of this panel, and why do you feel that we need to have these discussions?
Thanks, Georgia. Being part of the panel, first of all, obviously the call to the Northland. So if friends call out asking to be part of something from the Arrowhead, I'm there. I just love the people. I love the region. It's where my heart is. And I don't mean any offense to my Twin Cities friends and relatives and neighbors, but there is something special about the Arrowhead. I think these kind of conversations are important. We have this concept of Minnesota nice, and Minnesota nice often is sometimes a passive aggressive avoidance of tough conversations. And when we begin to open our eyes and recognize that our communities are not experiencing the wealth and greatness of Minnesota at equal rates and equal opportunity, we have to have tough conversations. So I appreciate Janet and Dawn sharing their story, helping us demystify what's been happening in Minnesota's history, what's happening today, so that we can build an equitable Minnesota. We need to do that. It is important for all of our communities. I'd also like to say about sort of caregiving in the LGBT community. There's a needs assessment that we did in Minnesota back in 2012, and we just repeated it in 2021. So we have some new data. LGBT people are less likely to have a caregiver. They're less likely to have a spouse or a child who are the primary providers of care. But interestingly, they're more likely to be a caregiver. They caregive at higher rates than the non-LGBT community. And often that's because families think, well, they didn't have kids, they don't have a spouse, they can take care of mom and dad. That can be their sort of life. Imagine sort of thinking about the spinster aunt that you had, or an aunt who was living with her friend, and all of these sort of concepts around LGBT and caregiving. One of the biggest issues is that we still have pervasive fear in the LGBT community of service providers. 8 out of 10 LGBT older adults don't know if they would receive safe services from a provider if their LGBT status were known. And that's impacting a lot of intersections with service providers to help with caregiving, to provide those needed supports. You know, we are in a great time for LGBT people, but we also have to remember that globally, there are still places in this world that if you say you are LGBT, you will be killed. It is illegal and the punishment is death. And so there's still a reality that the community faces, this inherent fear, this internalized homophobia and transphobia. So I appreciate the LGBT community being part of these conversations on diversity and aging. So thanks for asking, Georgia, and thanks for the Q&A from one of the attendees.
Awesome. Thanks, Rajean. I think that's a great segue. We have had a few questions coming in the Q&A. Folks are invited. We do want to make this a inviting space. There is no dumb questions, so please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And I'm going to hand it over to Amy to read off some of those questions and we can direct them.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And again, thank you, our panelists, for those great responses. So one question came in that's about resources that are out there. And so do you find the majority of caregiver resources that are out there easy to access and pertinent to your experience as a caregiver?
I will say that there are resources. Let me just start with our experience, though. When my mom needed more care, it happened like successive hospitalizations when I wasn't here. And so it became really traumatic for us as a family. But one of the things my mom knew is that she needed really good health care. And I think for years she may have been, I think she's been overpaying, but her knowledge and understanding that she needed all the health care she could get, because there wasn't a lot of family here. Most of our family is down south. It's just me. My brother is older and has moved away and hasn't come back to Duluth because of the trauma he faced. So she sort of planned and always paid for really good insurance. So we've never had that problem of paying for that, but that was good foresight on her part. I don't know that a lot of people understand that and how important that is, but I also understand that she is maybe paid too much. So she doesn't have a lot of savings. So there's not a lot of resources in that way. We've been able to eke out, because I'm here and she has her home, we've been able to eke out like about $500 a month to have a caregiver come in. But anything else, as far as being able to have her go to another place if she needs more care, she would lose her home. We have found the ability that, like, if I'm here as a caregiver for a certain number of years, they wouldn't take her home. And so that's what we're betting on. But it's kind of like if something happened, like right now, I think it's 7 years, I've been here 3. If something happens between now and then, she may have to lose her home. So when you say when I say there's some resources, I think the resource is just understanding how to work the system. And I think that's what we've done for years. Back when we're on food stamps or, you know, living in the projects, you need to figure out that system and how can you continue to maintain food and a home until you can get to a place where you can pay for it on your own. That's sort of how my life has been all my life. And I would say for people of color, that's what you're living. So there are resources, but I don't know that as me as an African-American and other African-American people, if it's accessible for us. I'm just going to pause there because now I'm sort of discerning what I just said and the realities of that. So let me pause. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, for that. Dawn or Rajean, do you have any comments on that question?
I think doing research and asking other people and, you know, just word of mouth, trying to find out, well, how did you manage this or whatever, worked best with my brother. And then when I'm caregiving my grandson, at first there was all these resources, and then once you go to like permanency, you know, where then it's like it's like you're driving along in a car and all of a sudden you come to a screeching halt. So then now it's like, okay, you got to figure it out on your own. Nobody's going to help you. So it's like that. So it's just asking around and trying to utilize different services and things like that. But when Rajean was talking, one of the things that kind of I could relate to was when he was talking about the hospitalization and you know, like certain people couldn't be included, or with one thing that I learned early on is that when I worked in domestic violence, when he was talking about that, I remember working in domestic violence, and if somebody had to go to court that was from a Native community, okay, and we had this group of police officers, judges, attorneys that we'd meet in Carleton County 6:30 in the morning just to have breakfast and talk about things. So anyway, the judge says, help me understand, when a Native person goes to court, okay, you got grandma, you got grandpa, you got aunties, you got all these people coming in. Why do they all have to be there? You know, so it was like, you know, like, why do they all have to be there? He was just like, you know, just floored away. He says, every single time, everybody's got to come. But I think it's a cultural thing, okay? Even with dealing with a hospital, you need your backup. That's all I can say. I hope you understand, Rajean.
That was great. Thank you for sharing that. It's and good of that judge, I guess, to ask and be able to have that conversation. Thank you for creating that table to have those conversations.
But it's unfortunate that the community of the LGBT community, that you may have that, but it's not, you know, like you said, those particular family members, but yet there's the other family too, you know, which is really, really good. But yet with the system, they're not welcomed.
Yeah. Thank you for acknowledging that, Dawn.
Yeah.
I think also one of the important components is even just identifying as a caregiver. You know, in the LGBT community, it's not really a word that's used, and I don't think it's used widely. I mean, if you're helping someone, you're helping your brother or your sister or your partner or you kind of don't think of yourself as a caregiver. It's just part of your role. And so that's, I think, one of the issues in seeking out services is that, well, I'm just helping, you know, my partner or helping whomever. And then, you know, for the LGBT community, one of the issues is it's not necessarily accessing services, it's finding services that are culturally sensitive to the LGBT community. And so it's important as a service provider to provide those welcoming signals. And it's things like, how do you do an intake? Are you asking people what their gender is? Are you asking people if they're married? Are you asking closed-ended questions, or are you attempting to capture a person's narrative, like asking questions, who is it important to include in your care? Rather than saying, do you have a spouse who can make decisions for you, or are you widowed? You know, allowing stories to be shared. I think those signals are almost more important than you know, all the advertising and billboards that you can put up. So I guess that's what I would say about accessing services.
Yeah.
That was great. There's some other questions have come through the chat as well. And what are some ways caregivers can find support and/or support groups? I don't know if any of you are part of support groups, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I just have family and friends, you know, and what I think about a support group is getting that break, you know, and making time for yourself, you know, and you know, knowing that, okay, that my grandson is being cared for, and now I can go and relax or go and do things that I want to do, you know. But I don't know of any. I think that it's very common across it's very common nowadays for Caucasian people to be caring for their grandkids, whereas before it wasn't. But now it is. So the way I see it then is that, okay, there'll probably be, you know, support groups or even media acknowledging that, you know, have a special on TV or whatever. Now I'm raising my grandkids or something like that. You know, I've seen that, you know, or in a magazine, or, you know, so it's more acceptable in dominant culture as something that is happening.
You know, well, one thing about support groups is that when we looked at the LGBT aging needs assessment, we asked people their interest in either having LGBT specific services, LGBT welcoming, or don't you care? And the vast majority of responses were, we want LGBT welcoming. We don't want to be separate from our friends who are not LGBT. The one exception to it was actually support groups. And we sort of explored this a little bit more. Why LGBT only support groups? And it's because there is some type of cultural experience and identity in sharing in a support group. You're sharing things that are emotionally and spiritually troubling to you. And it's really important to have people that understand the road that you've walked on.
Yeah.
And so in order for cultural groups to have an opportunity to come together to share their stories amongst one another is extremely vital. So the idea of just creating a support group for caregivers, that's great. We can all participate in those. but there are also unique experiences of LGBT caregivers, and I would assume also Janet and Dawn, African American caregivers and Native caregivers, that are so important that they share an experience together and be able to tell their stories in order to heal together or find that support together. So, you know, I think that's probably the one thing that I would say about support groups, is that they, above almost all services, need to have a cultural sensitivity and a cultural understanding, because of the vulnerability of the purpose of a support group, to help people emotionally and spiritually heal from some type of wound or get that support. So I don't know if Janet has other ideas, or Danya.
I would just, if I may, Don. Otherwise, I'll
Sure.
lose my thought. I'm not writing things down usually. Then when I write them down, I'm not as impulsive. I would say that caregiving in the African American community has gone on for years, and I still don't believe that it's recognized to the extent of how much and how long it's been happening. Some of it is just the secretive of the African American world and life, and how that seems like it's a part, you can't share a lot of things because it's always used against you. That's sort of ingrained sort of in our socialism, being an African American from slavery. Like, you just needed to just be quiet and do your thing and go home and be quiet and do nothing, say nothing. Otherwise, literally, you'll get lynched. And so that trauma of just being really close, only the people you trust in your family can be your support. We need to break through that. And some of that is part of the greater community of our Euro-Americans and breaking through colonialism and racism, and just continuing to show Black African heritage people that this is a safe place we want for you. We want you to build for yourself. And I think that's an important piece of it. If an organization, even well-meaning, wants to create a support group for African heritage caregivers, probably not going to get a lot of people there. But if you bring in African American caregivers and say, let me help you build this support, and we want to support you, that'll probably work better. So support comes through mostly family, you know, for me, although I'm a little more open because I've been in the medical profession and I work in the public. I'm open to having and reaching out when I need it, for whether it be my mom or my daughter or my grandkids. But a lot of people aren't there yet. So we have some work to do. I'll yield.
Thank you so much. I am really sad that we have to end this portion. I want to keep listening and learning and this conversation going, but unfortunately we are committed to wrapping up by 12:30 today. But I also want to note that this is just the beginning. I think we need to, as Rajean said, continue to set the table for these discussions to happen throughout our work and throughout our lives. And so there will be additional diversity and aging series that are happening, but I think I guess I'm going to speak just a little bit to some broader work that's happening on a statewide level relative to helping communities become more open and inclusive to people of all ages and backgrounds. And so there's actually a global movement underway that helps communities assess, plan, and prepare to be more respectful, inclusive, and welcoming of people of all ages. And we are using the terminology of age-friendly communities. The work towards age-friendly livability involves a continuous process improvement. It's approximately a 5-year process that involves convening or enhancing community coalitions, enrolling in the AARP network of age-friendly communities, conducting surveys and community listening sessions, and then developing and implementing an action plan. In 2019, Governor Walz signed an executive order launching Age-Friendly Minnesota movement, and this movement is still growing strong. Today, there is a Governor's Council on Age-Friendly Minnesota, and it is leading a statewide effort in making decisions about funding allocations for communities that are involved in the age-friendly movement. This series, the Northland Diversity and Aging Series, and the topics we're speaking of today are exactly the type of community conversations that happen in age-friendly communities. And it's exactly the work that we need to continue. So the age-friendly framework proposes 8 interconnected domains that can help identify and address barriers to the well-being and participation of older people from all kinds of backgrounds, and the well-being of people of all ages. For example, when we improve the built environment, so outdoor spaces, housing, and transportation for older adults, it improves the community for everyone. So as I mentioned, that's exactly the type of topics we're wanting to speak about. We're talking about social participation, respect, and social inclusion for everyone. This is a key attribute to age-friendly communities. Janet, Dawn, and Rajean have graciously shared their personal stories about the importance of including everybody's voice at the table, learning from each other, just creating that sense of openness and willingness to learn, a sense of curiosity. Everyone wants to feel valued, and they want to feel valued for who they are. Sadness and isolation can be combated by having social opportunities or conversations like these, where people feel welcome, respected, and heard. That's the only way that we can change what's in our communities. So I'm happy to announce in the Arrowhead region, we currently have 2 communities who have officially entered the Age-Friendly Network. These include Lake County, as well as Duluth, with potentially 2 more coming soon, which would be Virginia and possibly Carleton County. So if you want to learn more about this work happening regionally or statewide, or possibly explore incorporating age-friendly lenses, policies, and practices in your own community, please feel free to contact me or contact your local area agency on aging. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Amy to wrap us up.
Thank you, Georgia, for those excellent summation of what we heard today. Very inspiring as well. And it's really been a privilege and an honor to be with all of you this morning in this really important Northland Diversity and Aging series. And more importantly, I'd like to express our sincere gratitude and thanks to our panelists. Your work and your stories are both inspiring, humbling, and motivating. So Rajean, Dawn, Janet, thank you so much for the generosity of your time and your story. There's much for us to take and to learn as we apply our work and putting our best foot forward for age-friendly, inclusive Minnesota. So thank you for that. And again, on behalf of the series sponsors, again, want to thank all of you for attending. There's much for us to learn from each other, and as a higher ed institution, it's important to remind ourselves of the responsibility that we each play towards achieving social inclusion. Just a friendly reminder for some of our upcoming events in this series here on the screen, that March, our rural aging, we convene again in March 24th, June, September, and November. So please be on the lookout for registration for those and as well. And please do take the time. You'll be receiving a post-event survey. We are really valuing your feedback and your comments for us as we continue to move through the series. So please take some time to go ahead and fill that out. So on behalf of the College of St. Scholastica, the Northland Foundation, the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging, and the Duluth Aging Support, I want to thank you for attending and look forward to our future work moving forward for an inclusive Minnesota. Thank you.